Madam Clerk?
Okay. Ted Carlson.
Here.
Terry Kelly.
Here.
Kathleen King.
Here.
David Nesbitt is excused. Becky Wint.
Here.
Also present is Dee Ennis, Deputy Municipal Attorney, Lisa Toussaint, Administrative Hearing Officer, and Lisa Slusner, Deputy Municipal Clerk. We have a quorum.
All right, very good. Let's first take a look at the agenda. Does anyone have anything to adjust or add to the agenda? Please note we have several times certain items in the agenda today.
So is that then clear in the agenda?
Yes, your time certain items are in red. You notice
Okay.
there's one in section 4 and then one in section 3 in section 6.
And you'll see the 3 there.
So as time certain items, just be aware what that means. So the time certain, when we get to that time, if those people are here, we will stop whatever we're doing and go right to them. That's
Okay.
okay. The motion to approve the agenda? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Great. Approved. Let's see, our guests are not here yet for our 11:30, so let's move on to the minutes from the previous meeting. Anyone have a chance to take a look at the minutes?
And can I note for a possible correction on number 6, new business? It said that I would bring the question back to the board. This is the liberty tax question, back to the board as an advisory opinion. And it was my memory that we had asked Ted Carlson to go speak with the APD, and then after that we'd make a determination whether we would do this, thinking that that if APD withdrew that request, that we would probably not convert it into an advisory opinion.
That's my recollection as well. So why don't we make that adjustment? So that's on.
Just take that out.
That's in
Just the very
6,
first line.
6 beneath where it says in the motion without objection is the first sentence there. It says Ms. Ennis will bring the question back. And I don't think we had said she would do that. I think my recollection too is that we'd have Ted talk to them and then have a report back from Ted about how that went and then decide from there.
Okay.
Okay, and D, and then how about for the next one in C, did we say that you were going to write a short paragraph?
We did.
Or- We did, okay.
We did say that.
All right, any other edits to the minutes? All right, do we have a motion to approve the minutes as amended? Second? All those in favor? Aye. Great, all right, minutes are approved. So our guests are still not here.
Oh, there you
so-
are. They're sitting up there.
Oh, they are? Oh, well, in that case, let's bring them in. So again, everyone, if you go to present economic interests, the first one right there after the orange divider, front and back, is the 2 guests that we're going to be having discuss.
This is Steve Morse, and you're the deputy person over at DHHS, and this is Melinda Freeman. She's the head person over there, director. And I had asked him to come here so that Melinda could do penance for writing her brief.
Illegible handwriting.
Illegible handwriting, and this is, where is it now?
After the orange.
Oh, I think, okay. And here, Melinda, here is yours. I'll give you Steve's. And I did meet with them and talk through this a little bit, but I thought it would be helpful for other people. And Melinda, you're on the front page.
Okay.
Would you mind handing that back?
You're absolutely right. It's hard to read.
Huh?
It's hard to read.
And essentially, Melinda was disclosing that her
Oh, yeah, we
husband,
should definitely turn the lights on now. So
Melinda was disclosing that her husband now works for Neighbor Works, and the municipality gives funds, grants and projects to Neighbor Works. And Melinda, as the head of DHHS, is often the person who is forwarding a recommendation for grants to Neighbor Works, and her husband now works for them. And he is a resource development director. It's his first year there. That's why this is coming up at this point. And But she was going to explain, I think that what she does at the MOA side has to do with capital grants, capital funding, and what her husband has to do with is operating funding. So you were going to explain that to us so that we might understand why there wouldn't be a conflict.
So just to clarify, I forward recommendations from our expert team that works at DHHS on HUD-funded capital projects and operating. And so I forward those to the mayor for his final decision, the Assembly's decision. And when my husband started working this last year at NeighborWorks Alaska, although his title is Resource Development Director, he primarily works on developing partnerships and operating dollars for their programs at NeighborWorks, not necessarily bricks and mortar projects. But it doesn't mean at some point he wouldn't touch a grant like that. So the way I try to maintain all of the potential conflicts of interest at the health department is that I do not ever serve on any proposal evaluation committee within the health department on any of these projects at all. So we have our experts that review these, and they're all experts in building and capital projects, and I merely forward those recommendations to the mayor. I do not impact those. I do not decide on funding for any of these projects to make sure it's such a small town and it's such a small state. So that's how, and next time I'll type all this out so it's not so hard to read.
Could you tell us a little bit about the independence that your expert evaluators have from you?
Yes. Well, we are still a team at the health department. We have about 108 staff, and the division manager, Steve Ashman, he's one of a direct report to me. And Steve Ashman oversees emergency preparedness, and he oversees the community safety and development division of the health department. And they decide and make recommendations to the mayor on operating grants from HUD, as well as the Human Service Community Matching Grant. I forward those to the mayor. So if there are suggestions on how I could improve that, I'm certainly open to improving that, but he is a direct report to me.
Okay.
So maybe that could be structured some other way. But I have a lot of experience in capital development and projects, operating capital projects and that kind of thing in Alaska. And so anyway, that's probably why he's a direct report to me. That's the structure that we have at DHHS. Fiscal and admin reports to Steve Morris as the deputy director, and then these other programs are the managers or direct reports to me. So there's 3 layers between, there are 2 layers between the decision makers and my role as the director regarding projects. There are the experts that work for the division. So let's say we have 3 experts in accounting and housing that report to a program manager. That program manager reports to the division manager, and the division manager reports to me. So those are the layers. But it's still 108 staff. You know, as the director, you kind of impact everything. But I do not sign off or make recommendations on this behalf, because I know everybody that relates. I may not have a relationship with all these people that apply for funding, but I pretty much know everybody, as most of us do. So.
Well, then you used to work for Rural Cap, didn't you?
Right. I used
Okay,
to
so
be
who's another pretty significant recipient?
Right. That I used to be the Supportive Housing Division Director for the Rural Alaska Community Action Program, or Rural Cap. So that's another reason that I would not consider serving on the board, which is what Steve Morris does. But the Muni has a seat on the Rural Cap board, and I wouldn't even consider sitting on
Okay,
that
well,
board.
before we get to that.
Yeah.
So you're saying that because of all your team, you're not in the selection, you don't act in the selection capacity, you don't select either Rural Cap or Neighborhood Works. Once your team makes that recommendation, then you may pass it on.
That is correct. I do not evaluate those grant proposals. I don't have anything to do with sending out the public notices, the grant applications, the development of the RFPs or the request for funding proposals. I don't have anything to do with that. The annual action plan that gets posted and sent through the mayor and through the Muni Assembly, all of that, I try to foster as much independence as possible with those processes.
Have you ever elected not to pass on a recommendation of the expert evaluation team, or had any other discretionary role in whether or not to forward their recommendation on to the mayor, or just, is it really ministerial? You get the recommendation, it receives your stamp and goes on to the mayor?
Yes, I've never said, you need to remove this agency or that application is not viable. I don't even look at the applications. I just, I read through their recommendations, so I know what I'm doing if the mayor or the meeting manager wants to talk about anything.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, I have never removed anything or said you need to fund this or impacted it in that way.
And this has been problematic in the past because I call it the nonprofit world,
Yeah.
and they're all related to each other, and they've all served on each other's boards, and they all go back 20 years, and they've switched nonprofits 3 times, and so it is very difficult. And I do remember when we decided to put that Steve Morris would go on the Rural Cap board, because this will come up when Steve talks, because there's a muni position that's identified on that board, and to not put Melinda there, because she used to be them. So it's a tough world, because they're all in it together.
Could you talk, oh, go ahead, Ted, yes.
I used to sit on the evaluation board there for many years, and when we got the application, and we would view them all, and then we would score them. And then we would pick out the one with the highest score, let them, they got picked out, and then we forwarded them to the director of human services. Is that the way it still works?
Yes, they have.
Okay, then do you yourself sign anything or anything before you forward it to?
I do. I sign a memo that says this is moving from the.
Okay, would, if, word for,
Neighbor works.
neighbor, okay. If they were to receive a grant, would you have any objections to having him sign that?
Not at all.
So that there wouldn't appear to be any conflict there?
Sure.
Even though you had no decision on, but nobody could complain that there was a decision.
Sure.
And if they don't receive a grant, will your husband still be employed there?
Yes.
Okay, so receiving this grant, even any one of these grants, has no bearing on your husband's job.
That's correct.
Okay. I have, thank you.
Anyone else?
Clear as mud, huh?
All right, I guess,
Okay, so then do we want to move to Steve?
I suppose so.
So if you
yeah.
turn over that page, so Steve is a deputy, and he sits on the Rural Cap board, and it's a muni spot, means the mayor appoints, so they put him there. And then just, I guess the somewhat confusion that there is, there can be municipal funding involved. And Steve, you were just explaining that if Rural Cap has to vote on something that is, involves capital, money from MOA, that you don't.
Yeah, I abstain, even if it's even an application for a grant, I'll abstain, if it's a municipal related grant. And I think I'm required, I'll do that for this reason, and also HUD, if it's HUD related, and we're involved, the federal rules require that I not be involved. So I, keep it not real far away. And I don't know if this is an issue, but I just want to point out that when I became part of the ROCAP board, which was 4 years ago, Melinda was not in the employ of Health and Human Services. She was working for ROCAP. So there's, and the reason that one of the reasons that I think that it's been traditionally filled by a health department employee. The prior employee was directly overseeing some of the grants, and so it was thought that it'd be better if it was, arm's length, and I don't have direct oversight over that division. So that's one of the sort of ways we've kept at arm's length.
Okay. We'll call you in, yeah, if you.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Morris? Okay, that's pretty good for me too.
So, I mean, I would assume that they're appearing to do their very best to manage any conflicts as they arise. You're acutely aware of those conflicts.
Yeah, and I would just, Mr. Morris, I would just recommend that, when you do, perceive one of these situations, that the standard rule of thumb is to avoid both deliberating and voting on these issues. So just sort of like try to like seal yourself out, because you can still have influence even if you deliberate. So
Yeah.
I only mention that because we have a number of people, these are saying, if something comes up, I won't vote on it, and then it's like, we've been sending little letters out to people saying it's not enough just not
Yeah.
to vote.
Yeah,
You
no,
know,
that's-
influence can occur
I
through
don't
deliberation as well.
participate in the discussions
Right.
when that comes out.
Okay,
Okay.
well, thank you both for your sort of like, your meticulousness and care in this issue.
Oh,
Thanks for making the time to come down today. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much. We'll pass this over to Dee so her booklet is. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And by the way, who just stuck his head in is Jason Smith.
That was my guess, yeah.
Yeah, it was Dollars for Dogs.
That is one of us is about to be arrested.
What is he here for?
He's here, well, I can explain, it's a request for advisory opinion. Do we
Yeah,
have,
but,
did it
I
come in
mean-
as a request?
Oh, yeah, it was in,
Excuse
the-
myself.
Huh?
Do I need to?
I doubt it. This is on the relationship between Dollars for Dogs and the city.
Mm.
And are there any ethical concerns about that group giving money to the city? Our municipal manager, I think, was somewhat concerned.
Oh, okay.
And so we said, well, the ethics board is meeting. So I would think not. Ted, you probably have a fair amount of knowledge about that group.
Since he's here, does anyone have any objection to moving to him now? We'd be meeting him in 8 minutes anyway by the time certainty, so it might be nice just to knock him out while he's here.
Where is that?
7C.
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 I'm gonna give all this a few seconds to read, because it just came in. So now I'll see how much we need to. 7C.
7C.
And it's a 501c3, it's supposed to be, it's a nonprofit. You may.
I know. Well, maybe he did. Maybe that's the surprise. Maybe that's the guest appearance.
I might sway my vote. I have to admit, I'm a sucker for a dog in uniform.
He talks for a half hour and then the guest appearance. He goes, oh, okay.
Okay, everybody, this is Lieutenant Jason Schmidt.
Good morning.
And he's been handling for APD, trying to paper the relationship between Dollars for Dogs and APD. It's been sort of a apparently largely unwritten benefactor type arrangement for 20, 30 years, right?
Yeah. May
And,
I pass
sure,
these
sure.
around, so if you just would like to grab one and pass it around the table, that would be great.
And Jason, I don't know if you want to go, you want me to start, or they've read your, I'd be glad to start.
Yeah,
You
go
want
ahead.
feeling
That'd
okay?
be great.
Anyway, this came up because new chief and New chief wanted to see what paperwork there was, and then some ethics questions came because the Dollars for Dogs gives tremendous amounts of money to the canine unit every year. Not every year, but pretty routinely. Dogs can be $12,000, and they pay for officers to go out and pick the dogs, and they pay for the per diem while they're out there. And so a couple issues came up right away. Is one, we wanted to get that papered, but that's easy enough to do. But then the idea was, okay, are there gift issues between the entity being Dollars for Dogs? And by the way, 501c3, obviously nonprofit, but this is a very common type of a 501c3 where they're sort of an auxiliary to a government entity for some specific purpose. So they're well in line with that. They've had their IRS status forever. So the first question, are there any gift issues between DFN and MOA? And my quick answer was no, because the ethics code is not meant for entity-to-entity issues, really. It's sort of two employees or two elected officials, that type of thing. So I didn't think that was much of an issue to begin with, but also because, again, this is exactly the purpose of this type of 501c3 entity. I don't know if people want to discuss that any further. I just didn't have any issue with Dollars for Dogs and MOA, giving money to MOA. That just wasn't an issue. Now, the format, whether it has to be by grants or something else, I think that's an administration issue. This is part of operations, and so it is an administration concern how this is done. It's not an assembly concern, but it is administration. But that would be a policy decision from the municipal manager. So then the next one was, okay, what about, is there a gift issue between Dollars for Dog and the individual officers who go out on these buying trips? Because DFN gives them, DFD gives them, gives one person a credit card. How does that work, that credit card business?
So what I provided to you is a copy of our paperwork, start to finish, whether we look at equipment, a dog buying trip, or training for the officers. The way this works is it's the same every time. We have a form that we fill out that is a request for funds for Dollars for Dogs, and then we provide it up the chain of our chain of command, and then it goes to Dollars for Dogs. Everybody signs it. And then a credit card is obtained from Dollars for Dogs, and that is given to whoever, in the instance of a dog buying trip, that's the biggest dollar amount that we're dealing with. That will be given, the credit card will be given to either the trainer, the lead trainer, or if the sergeant goes, it'll be given to the sergeant to take and have. The credit card is nothing but really a vehicle to get us where we need to be, because we need to have a special truck to have the kennels in the back when we go on a dog buying trip and things like that. We need to secure the hotels, and then the only thing that kind of throws a wrench in the whole process is the current kennel that we go to is in Sharpsville, Pennsylvania, and they don't take credit cards. So what they do is they provide a check that is to the kennel, signed by Dollars for Dogs, with an empty amount. The dogs can range anywhere from $9,000 to $12,000 each, depending on if they have some training or whatever. They have their price tag, and it is what it is. We just have to pay it. So we go and selection test the dogs. So the handler then will fill in the amount, take a copy of it, give it to the thing, to the kennel, and then we pick up the dogs and we go.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
But I want to declare that, I was part of setting this whole process up, 30 years ago, or 25 years ago. So I want to make sure those are the things that I have a conflict here with this. I'm very familiar with the whole process. Like I say, it started out when we got our first dog. I was part of that, so.
Well, that might. I'm inclined to think that there's at least a real potential conflict, but at the same time, I don't want to deprive us of your insights because you're familiar with the process, and so I would suggest I would like to suggest that you participate in the board's deliberation on this matter, but if we vote on something, I think it would be best to at least abstain from the vote.
Okay, so I can participate, but not vote.
At least that's my feeling. I'd like to hear what other people think, but I think Ted has insight because he is familiar with the process. But I do think there's at least a potential conflict given his previous involvement with this program.
I don't know if knowledge presents the conflict. It's whether whether he has a personal interest in the outcome of this at this point in time. Do you have a personal interest?
Well, no, I mean, there's no financial or any personal interest here other than the fact that I wanna make sure this continues on. You know, Dollars for Dogs continue on and our canine continue on like anybody else would.
Sure.
You know, I don't think anybody here would say that.
Okay,
you know.
given that.
Yes.
Given the bias.
That would be
Expressed bias.
that would be the private
Why
interest.
Why don't we treat Mr. Carlson as a fact witness,
Yeah.
and that he can
I think
participate by giving us
that's a good
information?
approach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. So that's the process, and everything is really, really above board as far as documentation goes. There's never cash that is to the handler or anything like that. The closest thing to cash, just for discussion and full disclosure on all this stuff, is if we assist Dollars for Dogs with a demo and people are donating cash to Dollars for Dogs. That's the closest the handler ever gets to any cash money that is exchanged between anything.
Could you tell us about that?
Sure.
So.
Well, can I finish up on the buying trip, just so we can kind
Sure.
of put that to
Mhm.
rest, and then we'll go back. I'll kind of take you through each component to Dollars for Dogs and how they raise money and things like that. So we go on the buying trip. The credit card is, like I say, I kind of view it as the vehicle to get these things secured and paid for. The vehicles and the hotels are all prearranged, so it's not like the handlers go down there and say, "Oh, I want to stay at a 5-star hotel." It just doesn't happen. In fact, the hotels we stay at aren't the greatest because they accept dogs.
They accept dogs.
so I mean, we're not staying at 5-star places. They usually, so everything is prearranged. So when they go, there's really the only complete unknown is the dollar amount for the dogs, because we have to go selection test and then we get the dogs that are best for our program, best suited for our program.
Can I ask, is there at least a way of sort of, guarantee, like, does anyone know sort of upfront what the available dogs actually cost? And so I don't know if it's so much like an ethics concern, but I would think, if you sort of like just threw this into the newspaper, sort of the way you presented it, certainly one concern would be, wow, you've handed someone a blank check. They're going to go and they're going to write the price. What really prevents, let's say, the officer and the employee working at the kennel from saying, hey, put an extra $3,000 on the price and we'll split it and we'll call it good, and who's really going to know?
Well, the dog world is odd in the sense of the kennels are very secretive. All the dogs come from Europe, and the kennels are very secretive from who they are with over in Europe. So they because they don't want anybody coming in paying more for the dogs that their kennel gets. So when the dogs come over, they can range in huge price differences because a green dog that's absolutely no training, very young, will be say $8,000 or $9,000, whatever the going rate is, kind of across the country. Then there's a certain amount of training they get, and then they have pre-titled, and then there's titled. And we don't get any of those dogs because we don't get the title dogs because they're trained with something that our philosophy doesn't really, we have to train it out of them in order to train ours in.
Right.
So we do that. Then there's also dual purpose dogs where we have some of those, and I can explain that in a minute, but those are very expensive dogs. So police departments will pay $20,000 to $30,000 to $40,000 for a ready to go canned program dog. We don't get that. We get the 15 and less dog. So to say, to address your question, we could ask what are your ranges of dogs, but really it's a a trust issue. Really, we get down there and there's never been a conflict like that per se. It's always been. We get
Or at least
down
you've
there.
never discovered one.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That goes.
And
In terms of in terms of accountability, there is a gap there. Then, right?
Sure.
I mean, there is a point where an exchange is ultimately being made. An officer has a blank check.
Well, in theory, they have a credit card too. You could strike a deal with the, hotel worker
Yeah,
and say,
it's their, it's a
Charge me
product that they're
$700.
selling.
Well, I guess, but it sounds like you've pre-approved
Yeah.
the hotels though, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
so it seems like there, if the credit card comes back and it's like, you rang up like $1,000 bill at the bar,
Yeah.
it would be obvious what happened there, right? Whereas in the case of the kennel, it wouldn't be all that obvious. That especially you're talking, $12,000, $13,000, $14,000.
Sure.
Throw an extra couple $1,000s on the,
Sure.
you really
It-
would
it
know
couldn't-
worse to wear, which is not to impugn upon the character of these officers, but
Right.
when it comes to trust, if it is about trust, then part of accountability is a part of that.
Sure. It could be. I don't know how we would address that. The reason we chose this kennel is we've been all over the country and we've used the same kennel for 8 years. And since '08 was the first time we went to Shallow Creek. And they, kennels are not, sometimes they're not ethical. They're what we have been in situations, APD was pre my time as the sergeant of the unit, where we went to Von Lick Kennels, who's a huge kennel. He's all over the country. He's a big name in the dog world across the country. And they sold us a dog that had been returned by Border Patrol. And we got this dog, and it just wasn't working out. It was crazy. Well, it turns out it had a chip in it, and we didn't know that. And typically they don't chip their dogs. We chip them and do all that stuff. But we found out that it came from a Border Patrol down in, I think, Texas or something like that. And so we called them, and it had been returned. Well, that wasn't disclosed when we were buying the dog for a problem. John at Shallow Creek will disclose everything. If he gets a dog back, he won't sell it. If it fails in patrol, no matter what the philosophy is that the department is using, he'll tell you. And so, and it's super clean. It's really nice, very impressive establishment, very, very impressive. So, I mean, to address I understand what you're saying, and yes, could it happen? But if we had a credit card, it could happen also. The fact that we're paying for a dog, he just doesn't pay the 3% on a $15,000 dog or $12,000 dog or whatever it is going to be pretty high, and his profit margin is not that great. And so to address your question, I don't know how we would address it, quite frankly.
Well, I mean, I guess the way you'd have to address it is sort of like is to find out how much the expected costs would be, like you would do for the hotel, right? And again, maybe they're too secretive to do this, but let's say, look, there's only certain kinds of dogs that we're even interested in. So before you send the officer down, what you could do is say to the kennel, give us a list of all the dogs that are are falling into the range of the kind of dog, and then what would be the price of each one of those dogs. And then it's true, it's within the officer's discretion to say, this was the dog that best worked out, fine, but at least then there was a kind of like pre-approval of, that dog cost $15,000, you wrote a check
But
for $15,000.
don't you almost do that? I mean, you know that they know what range they're looking for in terms of skills. And they
Right.
have an estimated cost for that range of skills.
Yeah,
That's
we've
okay.
never paid over 12,000. The dogs just go up. It just in price, just like everything. I have new cars, they go up 7% a year. Dogs, I don't think are quite 7%, but they go up each time we go on a dog buying trip, which is, geez, every time I say this, it changes, and I apologize for this, but it's about every 18 months we're going out for dogs. It's just the way it works out, and so they go up. The cost just goes up, and his cost. So his profit margin is not that great. So he has to increase his for what he's paying out to Europe. So I think. I mean, we could put a cap on it and say that they won't be more than $15,000, or more than 12 or something like that, but we really don't know. And you also have to understand there's 30 dogs there, and we go and test a good number of them.
Mhm.
The nice thing about John is he was a handler from Florida, and now he's a business owner, and he knows we travel a long way. He knows it costs us a lot of money to just get the guys down there and get the dogs selected and get them back home. And so he won't tell us which dogs to buy, which is really nice, but he'll say, these dogs will be better suited for your program. You may want to look at them, and things like that. And it's very nice. And it's not a cost thing because he has more expensive dogs. But anyway, I guess we would need some instruction on how to address it, but I think our process is pretty good. We trust them. It'd be better than Von Lick. I wouldn't trust that kennel for anything.
Do you know how other municipalities do it?
Oh, it's all over the map. Yeah,
It's all over the map.
They'll go. They won't have their training program, so they will buy the canned dog. They'll go down there and they'll get a 2-week handler instructor course and hand them the dog and say, "There you go," and they'll write them a check for God knows how much money, and then they'll go back home. Super high liability in that. Super high
Right.
liability. And so.
But I just wonder, in terms of like the payment side, right, it's hard to imagine that, like, you know, New York City hands officers blank checks and says,
Oh,
go to
no,
the
they do.
kennel.
We're there when the other
They do,
agencies
so they
come
do the
in.
same
Sure.
thing?
Well,
They have- they
John
come-
doesn't take anything but a check or cash, you know, and we're not gonna send him down there with 15 grand in cash,
Yeah.
you know, so that's
Right.
not gonna happen. And really, you know, we photocopy the, you know, the check and all that. You know, if there was a worry that maybe money would be going back to the handlers, geez, that never even crossed my mind. I mean, it just, you know, that wasn't something.
Well, you'd risk your career over $1,000.
Yeah, over $1,000, and I just don't, we just don't have that issue, you know, and really, there's copies of everything, and so, if we took that analogy, Dollars for Dogs would then do their taxes at the end of the year and say, wait a minute, you know, things aren't adding up here, I think it would be caught, and there's just nothing has ever been caught like that, so that's, the buying trip is the big one, that's really expensive. A very simple one is equipment, the muzzles that the dogs wear for training, bite suits, and things like that. We have orders once or twice a year, the kennels for the back of the vehicles, we're gonna do an order there. We put together a list of equipment that we need, put in a request for funds through the chain of command, through the Dollars for Dogs, and then they will give us the credit card, and then we will order the stuff offline as it comes in. The original goes to the original receipt goes to Dollars for Dogs, and a copy is retained in the K-9 office, so that there's accountability. And if on the first page here, if you just thumb through the first 2 pages, just put those back, you'll see the Dollars for Dogs. And I do apologize for the terrible copies. They look better originally, you know, in the original. But this is what you can see. This is a K-9 training equipment, and then you can you see attached sheet. And then it's signed off. This is from 2014. This is when Chief E was there. And you flip through the next page, and it'll, you know, there will be an outline from one of the trainers, and it'll say these are the items we need. And then you flip the next page, and you'll kind of see how expensive everything is. This is a little bit more than normal. Our bite suits usually last about 4 or 5 years, and then they get wore out from being chewed on for so long. But this one was, you know, $4,400, $4,500. And there is a little bit of an approximation in there. There's a variation because shipping oftentimes is different. When you're shipping a bite suit, sometimes they come from Europe, and we can't cover it. You know, so we say approximately this amount of money, and it always works out. You know, there's never been a $1,000 discrepancy or anything like that.
What's a bite suit?
That's what the dogs.
The dog
the
wears?
agitator is the decoy.
Okay.
He'll be the bad guy. Basically, you put on the bite suit, and you'll
okay.
probably see him on TV or something like
Just
that.
for like rehearsing with the dog.
Yeah. The training is all it is. And so, if this building is shut down at night and there's a burglar in here, so we simulate that. We work at night from 8 at night to 6 in the morning. We'll put a bad guy in the bite suit in here, and we'll send the dog in. Handler will make the announcements, and the dog is trained to search all of the rooms that are open. And he'll come in and find. Now, depending on what drill we're doing, if it's a bite drill, the dogs are trained so that if you get up and run, you're going to get bit. If you sit passive and say, whoa, get your dog, then the dog will just sit there and bark, and that's a pinpoint behavior, and then the officers can then move up and take it. And that's the whole premise of our program, is because of John Floor and Harry Hansen that were killed. So, you know, that's the whole premise of our programs for burglary, you know. So at any rate, back to the paperwork, you can see that this stuff is pretty expensive, but this is how we, you know, this is just an example of one order that we did. The credit card is then returned back to Dollars for Dogs when all the equipment is ordered, and then we will provide them. Now, one catch we've been running into in the last 2 to 3 years is when we order stuff, anything, it's so strange. They'll send the item and with absolutely no paperwork. And it's like, it just kills me because I like having everything in order because of meetings like this. You know, I want to be able to answer the questions that you have. And so I can present this. Well, they won't send us anything. So we actually have to save emails back and forth and the order form. It's really become a pain. All they need, but the invoices don't come with the stuff anymore. It's just very strange. It's all electronic or an email or whatever. If you keep flipping through, you'll see the receipts that we did get. If you keep flipping through, you'll see a request for training. This is so Mark Haywood could go down to Gillette, Wyoming. Now, in Gillette, Wyoming is a gentleman named Randy Parker. He's now a retired police officer. He retired, I think, last year. He was one of the original, I'll oversimplify this because it's a very long story, but the bark and detain philosophy, which is what I've just described, which is if you're passive, the dog doesn't come in and bite you. That's it in a nutshell. Randy Parker was one of the original Americans that actually learned that philosophy, and he still stays active in the dog world today. We use him as a guest instructor to come up and audit our unit. We haven't in 2 years, but he was going through a knee surgery and things like that. But he did about every 18 months, he would come up and audit our unit. And just a terrific man, a great guy. Anyway, he had an academy going down there, and Mark went down for, our lead trainer at the time, went down for 2 weeks. Randy actually requested him, and Dollars for Dogs sent him down there. He did get per diem, and that is one thing that we had, I think most of our discussions has been over this per diem thing. And when it comes up, there's on one hand, no, absolutely not, we shouldn't do this, but on the other hand, it's like, well, it's really, they're getting paid for it. So the per diem is this, we figure out how many days they're gone, there's a certain rate, and then Dollars for Dogs writes a check to the handler for the per diem. They cash that check, they get it before they go on the trip. And it's this process that has been in place. I'm indifferent on it. I thought, well, it should probably go because it does look weird. The Dollars for Dogs does. They are writing a check to the handler, and which, maybe it just something doesn't sit right with us. But then we checked, and it was okay. It's allowed.
There's a P&P procedure, a policy and procedure that the city has, it's a mayoral directive that in fact addresses this as third parties paying per diem, and said fine, and not only that, but third parties could pay more than what our city would allow, and then there's a different tax consequence in this and that. So it is, I ran this through our travel person who handles per diem. He said, oh, this is a wonderful, clean way of doing it, thank you. So from an operational viewpoint, it was absolutely fine. And very common, if you send like attorneys, prosecutor will go out for a training session for some Department of Justice grant or something, and they get per diem paid by that program versus from us. So it's not uncommon either.
So that's the really the only thing that really kind of came up as, okay, but it turns out it's fine. It's okay, so that's fine, and there's good accountability. I mean, there's a record of it, and Dollars for Dogs has to do their tax stuff at the end of the year. So that's pretty much equipment, training. On the right-hand side, I gave you a copy of the dog buying trip. I guess that's the only thing I didn't cover. When the officers get back, you can flip 2 pages back. Oh, the cover page there is actually authorization for, in this particular case, Chris Nelson, to handle the credit card. So that's authorization there. That's good. I mean, and there's phone numbers and everything, in case there's an issue.
So Jason, one person has credit card, one person has blank checks. I mean, not everybody on the trip has access to those 2 things.
Yeah, no.
No,
It'd be
so it's one
that
lead
would-
person.
Yeah, that's correct. And then you flip the 2 pages, and then you would have the 2014 dog buying trip. And basically, it is everything that we did. The reason why, all of where we stayed, all of the expenses, and then even so far as to the receipts. We have the invoice, which actually, I don't know what page that is, but you have Shallow Creek Kennels. In this particular case, there was one dog, they were both $10,500. So it's $21,000 total, and there's the receipt for that, and we wrote the check. There should be a copy of the check in here. At any rate, they usually fax. What might have happened on this is that they faxed the copy of the receipt to them. It may be in here, but at any rate, we do get a copy of the check before they hand it over. And that's it. All of the gas receipts are here and all that. So it's. I believe I was a sergeant of the unit for about 7 years. I was promoted to lieutenant over a year ago, and I'm the commander of the unit for the last year. It's a very good system. We haven't had a hiccup because there's such good checks and balances, if you will. There really is. Now, if handing a credit card is, to an officer is an issue because of a rule somewhere, that's fine. I mean, then we can address that. But as far as the ethical side of them getting gifts or gratuities or anything like that, it's all right here. It just doesn't happen, and they don't handle money. They don't handle the cash. They're presenting the credit card and they're presenting a check. And to me, even the check, we just have to deal with it because Shallow Creek is there, and I understand it, the blank check could be a question mark, but understanding the process, we don't have any option. The only thing we could do is if we went down there, this was actually brought up this winter when we were discussing some of these, is if we get down there and we select our dogs and then we have a cashier's check transmitted down there somehow. So maybe we could do something like that. However, it becomes clumsy, and our guys only got 5 days, which means they have to get there, get settled in, they have to start selecting dogs, they have to get the dogs to a vet, and then they have to travel back to Chicago, which is 5-hour, 6-hour drive to get on a plane to come home. I've been on them, and it's a fast trip. It's a really, really fast. You're really moving. So to introduce more time-consuming things just makes it that much more expensive because it might add a day or something like that. So that's the only way I would actually, that's what I would offer up, is that it would become, we can introduce other things. We can do anything we want, to get the payment down there, but it just adds to be clumsy. And if we have a system that works and we don't think that there's any issue with it, there hasn't been an issue in the past, and we don't foresee an issue, then we can do it. So, yeah.
Who picks which officers get dogs? APD command, or who does that?
It's a need-based thing. For instance, we had, I'll start back in 2015, we had 2 openings in the K-9 unit. So we had a selection test and a process for handlers to come in. So patrol officers put in to be K-9 handlers. They came into the unit, and so we needed 2 dogs for those handlers. The dogs go home with the handlers. When you sign on to be a K-9 handler, you're with that dog more than you are with your family. I mean, it is a huge commitment. The dogs go home with them at night. They go to work with them during the day. It is a massive, massive commitment. So we have the 2 new handlers, and so the dogs go out, the trainers go out. They go on the buying trip. They select the best dogs for our program. And then they come back, and there is some discussion on which dog goes with which handler, because sometimes personality does play a role. We had this super MP, he was my favorite dog, super massive, powerful dog. He was just a great dog, very controllable, awesome, but he was just huge. Well, we had a guy that was about 5'5" and 135 pounds, and then we had a guy that was about 5'10" and about 225. Well, we have to. It's the taller, bigger, stocky guy that's going to control MP. That's what. So those kind of things play into it. And some of the personality does too. If you have a dog that's a little bit harder, that's a little bit tougher to handle, you may want to give him to a previous handler, so they know the learning curve is not so
But
steep.
it's APD command, basically.
Absolutely,
APD
yes.
K-9 group that makes that
Yeah, it's
decision.
all K-9. Yeah, it's all-
Dollars for Dog doesn't make that
No,
determination.
They don't make that decision at all.
Is there any more connection between Dollars for Dogs? Like, it sounds like you said that they do some fundraisers where the handlers may be present. Is there any kind of
Yeah, I'm sorry.
celebration of the dog handlers where they're all there? The connection between the actual Dollars for Dogs organization and the handlers who get the dogs in the end?
Sort of.
Okay.
And I'm glad you brought it up. Thank you. I almost forgot. So, demos and fundraising. We'll address that. So, we used to do ConocoPhillips demo, which is kind of what you're asking about. It's the biggest demo that they had. Dollars for Dogs would get the ConocoPhillips building over wherever we are over here. Whichever direction it is, we all know where it is, the atrium. Yeah, so it's right over there. So we would get the atrium, and it was a big fundraising event. All the handlers are there, all the dogs are there. We had picture taking, we had all kinds of stuff, so we're there. Dollars for Dogs would provide snacks. Sometimes the pictures, we'd get a volunteer to take pictures of people with the dogs and all that kind of stuff. Now, are there times when they're getting donations for T-shirts and things like that? And there's an issue with saying they're selling them versus that's all tax-related stuff. That's all of their issue. So whether you donate $25 and get it a T-shirt, or if that's how their wording is, that's what they have to do.
And it's $1 for dog T-shirt.
Yeah, it's $1 for dogs.
But there, and I guess what I'm trying to get to is thinking about this ethical question is if there, it sounds like in that instance, the handlers are there basically to assist Dollars for Dogs in getting donations for the
That's exactly what
organization.
they're doing.
As opposed to if they don't have, the Dollars for Dogs doesn't do like a handler appreciation event or anything like that. Do they, or do they do anything where there'd be sort of the handlers themselves would be receiving some kind of additional
No.
benefit?
Oh,
from
no.
Dollars for Dogs? Okay.
No, we go there to assist Dollars for Dogs on all of the
Including-
demos. The
including-
closest thing to what you're describing would be when someone donates enough money for a dog, which is about $13,000 now. The handler will then, when he's trained, after he's trained and we can take the dog out of the car and all that, we'll take him to whoever donated the money. We'll get pictures. We like to have a Dollars for Dogs representative there, but they don't get anything. They already got the dog, that went in the municipality.
Yeah.
And the dog is municipal owned.
Okay.
So when we remove a dog,
When they retire or something.
okay, when they retire, they go, the handler has first,
Okay, to adopt them.
they have first right of refusal to adopt the dog, and they typically always do. There's been a couple of situations where the house didn't allow for it. They were getting a new dog, they had a personal dog, and they just couldn't keep that, so we find a suitable home, and they live out a great retirement life on the couch somewhere. They really
Yeah.
do, so. But no, they're never there. The closest thing, and just to address, because I want you guys to be comfortable with it, the closest thing is if we have the ConocoPhillips, and there is an officer there alongside Dollars for Dogs folks, and there is cash cash coming in and a T-shirt going out. That's the closest thing.
But none of
we
it
get
goes
you.
to the officer,
None
so
of
the
it
officer
does,
might be
no.
involved in handling
No.
it. That makes sense.
None
I'm
of
just
that.
trying to figure out if there's any kind of.
When the officer is there, is the officer in uniform?
Yeah, in the ConocoPhillips, absolutely, yes.
And does Dollars for Dogs pay to have the ConocoPhillips lobby, or is ConocoPhillips comping that?
I can't remember. It seems like there was discussions both ways, where they were comping that or they were renting it. They try to get donations, so they really try to do that, but I can't remember if they ever, I can't recall. They haven't done it in a couple of years, so I'm not sure. I know there was some discussion on BP. They have an atrium at BP, and I think they wanted to charge kind of the going rate, and I don't think Dollars for Dogs went there for that reason. So they either got a better deal or they got it for free at ConocoPhillips, something like that. I don't know. I remember hearing these stories, but they were, years ago. I can find out if.
Well, that
you know,
would probably be the Dollars for Dog, their tax world, and what they can accept and what they can't. That would probably not involve APD at all, is my guess.
So that's the process in a nutshell. And I can tell you that firsthand from a person that is very, very nervous about money. I really am. I want to have all the records in place. And now I have a sergeant that does my old job, and it makes me nervous because I want him to do what I did. So I'm training him, and he's doing a great job. I mean, he really is. So, but really, it is a good process for this, for what we do, and it's not clumsy. It's very smooth. It's a good transition, and there's good checks and balances throughout the whole process. There's a good, the credit card is a very good accountability. There's just nothing that can go wrong, and if it goes wrong, it's immediate and it's right there. And we just haven't had that. We just haven't had that issue. So. If I can, the grant issue, should I address that at all, or is that?
No, because I don't think, at some point, the question came from our municipal manager, could this be done by a grant? That Dollars for Dog would give, $30,000 to APD directly or something. And they said that it didn't work with their accounting as a 401c3 or something. And we decided it wasn't fruitful to say, you have to give us money in a certain format, unless there was some reason for it.
Yeah, I mean, this seems almost like it has more accountability built into it, because it's like, here's the receipt, this is what you're paying for. It's not, there's no question of you get $30,000, maybe you'll spend 10 on the dog, and then, where does the rest of it go? This seems much more clear cut and direct. And,
They were just quite insulted by the whole thing. You raise all this money for us, and now we're questioning the format.
Yeah, I meet with them tonight at 7 at one of their board meetings, and they're very active. Their organization has given us a lot of money over the years, and it's been a good program for our program. If we didn't have them, yeah, boy, we would be in trouble. We really would, because this is expensive. I mean, as you can see, you know, putting in order for muzzles out of kind of the blue, you can't. It's really difficult to plan for that in a municipal thing, and it is recognized as Dee described it nationally as the, you know, as I was trying to find the best practice line. I have that somewhere, and I was finding it, but national organizations have come up and looked at, you know, audited our department and our program, and yeah, this is a good way to go. It's just getting the money in, and it was a new question to us, and so we can answer it, and then it's set kind of in stone, you know.
Yeah, we have a written agreement, and again, there was a best practices analysis.
Mhm.
I've seen that somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think everybody was happy about it logistically, how that was going on, and the whole intent and motive. It was just the municipal manager that said, well, wait a minute, is there a gift issue here?
Well, and keep in mind, you know, just to point, you know, in terms of our questioning and everything, part of what goes into governmental ethics is also the appearance, right? You know, like, and how something would appear to the public, and so, you know, without that, there's not a question that, you know, you or your other fellow officers are
Absolutely.
corrupt, but it is a question of, you know, since public trust is involved,
Yeah.
and appearances do matter, and so that's some of the probing here is just sort of like, how, you know, what does that look like? You know, what would a typical citizen, this is a volunteer board, right? What would a kind of reasonable citizen looking to say, ooh, is that trustworthy or not? So that's just,
No,
you know, a
and-
lot of the motivation of poking here. Is,
Absolutely, and I welcome it because the canines, people love them. I mean, we're the best ambassadors for the police department we could possibly have. And if there's a hole someplace, I changed a lot of things in the canine unit because it was just, the answer was, well, that's just how we do it. And I thought, that's not quite really where we want to be. So I changed a lot of things, and this was one that when the chief asked me that, I went. He asked specific questions. When's the last time the relationship has really been looked at? And I thought, man, is that a good question? And I can't answer it. And so now this is what it's about. So I welcome any and all. In my email, I can give you my card. I will welcome any questions that you have, because if there's a hole, let's fill it. I can tell you that, you know, I'm not trying to sell this folder to you, but I haven't seen in my time there, I haven't seen a problem. And if there was a problem, I would say we would know it immediately. We would know that, okay, this just doesn't add up. But the process is, you know, the credit card comes in, it goes to a handler to order the stuff, it comes back to me, it goes back to Dogs for Dogs. It's very slick, it's very, very clean, and you know, works
One
well.
more question.
Mhm,
I
sure.
know one of the things we talked about in a previous question about this whole gift issue with the police department is the question of like the potential for favorable treatment. You know, someone is pulled over and it turns out they're like the executive director of Dollars for Dogs. Just kind of, you know, is there any kind of how much exposure is there between kind of the folks who run the nonprofit and the officers who are getting the dogs? Is there any remote possibility that somehow someone's going to end up, there's, you know, this potential for the appearance of impropriety where someone is you know, could potentially receive favorable or less favorable police action because they're, you know, they're part of this.
Yeah,
they're
imagine
pulling
like
dogs.
you get your picture taken with one of these donors, right?
Right.
So you know this person gave $13,000+. You know. Then through your ordinary police work, you now encounter this person in a moment where you have discretionary authority to act in a variety of kind of ways.
I would,
You know, are those situations possible? What would a situation like that look like?
well, I can give you a couple of examples. There's, I think there's currently 6 members on the board. One of the changes that we were going to make, there were 2 slots, according to their bylaws, where members of APD or members of the municipality are able to be on the board. When members of the unit were on the board, that can look bad because of the money issue. So I'm going to answer your question in just a second, but I want to get to it. I want to kind of open the door for another discussion, which is we have a handler on the board. Now, he would abstain from the voting on some of the money, but the influence is still there. So we're going to have a liaison instead that can kind of fill in, because Dollars for Dogs wants to know what's going on in the unit. They want to know who we're catching and all that kind of stuff. So that was one thing that we did address, and that's taken care of. As far as encountering them, there's only 6 folks that are on the board. The dogs work from 8 at night to 6 in the morning, and the people on the board are fairly responsible. They're usually home, and so there's not that. Will it encounter? You know, will there be an encounter? I can tell you a personal story. I was working one night as a patrol officer. This is a very long time ago, and a car blows a red light just big time. Just boom, and I stopped the car, of course, and I walked up and, Mr. Arthur, He was my 7th grade geography teacher. You know, so I mean, and he says, Jason, is that you? What are you doing out here at 3 o'clock in the morning? He says, I just picked up my wife from the airport, and you know, on and on. So, do these things happen? Yes.
Yeah.
And if we're gonna do, you know, if it's a criminal act, the officers are trained. They will get another officer over there to handle it. Say, these are my observations. Can you please handle this situation? That's an officer ethical thing. I don't think we can. I don't know that we can really build anything into you know, into a policy or into the funding to address that. That's an officer ethical, and it happens. We know people out in the community, not just this board, but we know other folks where if we know them, we'll get another officer over there to handle it. So if that answers your question, I mean, that's the best example I can have. There are some things that you just can't, you don't, I never thought I was going to get my 8th grade, you know, 7th or 8th grade. I was actually both my 7th and 8th grade geography teacher, so I had them both years. So I mean, you never foresee that type of thing. So the ethical thing is, if you're going to take action, you're going to get another officer over there. You go, neighbors are a good one. Neighbors come over and say, hey, I have this problem. My daughter, my son, my wife, whatever, and is it really ethical for you to take action on that? And the answer is no. The answer is no. You get your coworker over there and say, hey, can you handle this for me? This is what I know. It's all yours, and then you step out of it. And we actually get in substantial trouble if we don't do that. So, so that's kind of the, you know, I guess is that sufficient? I mean, that's the best analogy I can give you. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, Ted, did you have something you
Yeah.
wanted to ask?
Okay. In this whole process now, that if it's only between you and the officers and dollar for dollar. The police department is not involved in any of the money transactions. The city is not involved. Is that
Correct.
What I'm saying? That so.
Yes.
You know, when it originally started, you know, they paid the city, and the city police department put it part of the budget, and you know, but now it's completely separate.
Yes.
It's
Other than the funds are approved through the chain of command, the funds go directly to whatever we're purchasing. And one area that did come up, that was a topic of discussion from the Dollars for Dogs end, was basically, we don't want to put anything out to bid because we want it's not efficient, we can't do this. This is a board of volunteers, you know, handling this, and if we put things out to bid, like dogs, it would be awful. I mean, we don't know what we would even get if we put that out to bid. And so that would be a very difficult thing to overcome if we had to do that. So I guess, so no, we don't do that. It goes directly to the vendor that we're choosing. And we do, when we're buying kennels for the back of the vehicles, we're getting 4 new vehicles in the unit. Thankfully here this, I think this spring or summer, and the kennels are quite expensive. But we are, you know, it's self-governing in the sense that they look for what the best deal for what we're looking for is. They know I'm always counting that in as well, that, you know, we can't, it's not a blank check. It's, you know, we do need to look at, you know, what do we need, what suits our needs, what's the best for the dog, what's the safest for the dog. And then, and just a quick story that people find interesting occasionally when they hear about the dogs. A handler hit a moose one time at about just under 100 miles an hour. And he was driving an expedition, thankfully. The vehicle compressed and the rear doors wouldn't open. And they're all caged, they're all steel mesh on the thing, and then steel here and here, and I mean, they're a metal box. Well, when the doors compressed and the battery was disconnected, couldn't get the rear doors open. And he only had a small little slit in the window that he could see, and the dog was unconscious. So from that point, the firemen got there and popped the door. Dog woke up, and you know, we got him out. Well, from that point, I thought, well, you know what? We need a pass-through, so that if we have an emergency situation, we can at least drag the dog out, you know, in that situation. So we've changed. It always evolving, always changing. This process will probably change. It always does, but that's something that happens. So now we need to kennel with a partition or some type of opening so we can at least rescue the dog if we have to go back to the car. So things like that.
But all money transactions is between the canine unit and dollar for dollars.
That's correct. Okay. Yes. Yes. Other than the approval process, the approval is made through the chain of command, but the money is not transferred through.
Yeah.
Right.
Explain that approval process.
In this, the most recent case, when I was asked by the chief, they're above me, the captain, the deputy chief, and the chief are all new chain of command. And so I hand carried the request for funds for this current buying trip that we need to go on. I hand carried it to each level, and I said, this is the process, I'm hand carrying it so that we can discuss. If you have any questions, here we go. And my captain asked some very good questions, and okay, no problem, decided. Went to the deputy chief, and it was Gary Gillum, and DC Gillum, and he's very familiar with the dog unit, so he knows. But he has some really good questions. He's been kind of out of the mix for a while, so he has some really good questions. Signed it, and then I went to the chief, and I said, this is what we're looking for. I like to do that. I could just send it up the chain for signatures, but I like to explain, hey, we need dogs, we need some equipment, and this is what it's about, blah, blah, blah. But that's the approval process.
And then chief approves it,
Yes,
and then you take it to Dollar for Dogs.
correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Usually everybody knows it's coming, but the form is the formality. It's usually Dollars for Dogs. Like tonight, we're going to discuss the kennels that are coming. We're going to discuss the dog buying trip that's coming. We're going to discuss all this so they know it's coming. But the form is the formality, making sure that everybody's on the same page and we're all good with it. So yeah.
I wondered if Jason could step out for 5 minutes perhaps, and we discuss a little bit, because it'd probably be helpful, I didn't realize your meeting was tonight, if we gave you a preliminary indication.
Well, that'd be terrific because if I may, in November is when I took it was November. I took the request. We have a dog buying trip to go on, and we're in need of 2 dogs. And when I was asked the question by the chief, and so we started the process right about then. So we need 2 dogs, and Dollars for Dogs is waiting on us because they're a board of volunteers, and they're saying, hey, if it's over, it's over. If we're done, we kind of need to know this because we can't fundraise any, what are we doing here is basically what they're looking for. So thank you. That would be a terrific, if you can tell me something, that would be great. So
I think it's a great idea. If you wouldn't mind, if you
Yeah,
have the
absolutely.
time to wait just
I
5
do.
minutes.
I'm here today, so I'm at your disposal.
Are you in a
And Lisa,
release day?
could you tell the A1 person that
No,
would be
he
another
retired
10,
out of
15
there.
minutes?
Do you want this shot?
Yeah.
I'm gonna follow you up real quickly, there's another guy who's. pretty-
That's pretty short. And the 12 o'clock, the 1 o'clock should be pretty short. He actually could have remained in the room, but I thought,
Yeah.
this
I was
might
going
be
to say,
more
let's move into
expeditious.
executive session, right?
Yeah.
But I
It's more
guess we could. I
expeditious,
mean,
though. Well, should we invite him back in? I was trying to get us to go move it a little bit more
well, as a
quickly.
question of process, it seems to me that we can't really shut the door and the like unless we're going
Right.
to go to executive session, which I don't mind.
Which-
People would rather,
well,
if
this
people
is
feel like
a-
the deliberations will be more fruitful in executive
Yeah.
session, then
I just would like to the process of number one, of hiring a police officer, which I was involved heavily in the end.
Ted, before we get to you, could we figure out what we want to do though in terms of,
Oh,
do we
okay.
want the door to be
Yeah.
open, this to be continued in
Well,
public
this
session?
is
or do we-
confidentiality has been waived.
Confidentiality has
So
been
actually,
waived, so-
we should bring him back in and just
Okay.
have our discussion.
Do you wanna do that?
Yeah.
Is it sure? Let's do
What's his
that.
last name?
Jason Smith.
But I
Don't
would
you think?
like-
Yeah,
Well,
there's
we-
some
well, we
confidential has been waived, but we're not in executive session, if we can't exclude the public, right?
Yeah,
If
right.
the able guy wants to come in too.
Right.
Yeah, just hang
Bring-
out.
bring 'em all in, right?
I'll be all chat. I mean,
Jason, we just decided we shouldn't be excluding you because confidentiality has been waived, so you.
Oh,
you
okay,
get
great.
to-
listen to it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
No, I'm.
Yes,
gonna-
now, Ted, please, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Explain how, the process of selecting a police officer to start with, somebody, I mean, that's a very, very hard process to get in, be selected. And then they go through all the testing, then they're given the polygraph test. And there's a lot of training. And then when you decide to get up and want to go into the canine unit, there's more testing. And there's more selection. And one thing that, you have bad police officers, that's gonna happen, and that, but fortunately, we've had very few with the Aggie police cars, but they've been caught. But one of the things that the police department has to be able to do this is anytime they want, they could call him in and say, we want you to take a polygraph. And they can give him the polygraph. And if you flunk the polygraph, you're out the door. And, all police officers know that. And eventually they're gonna get caught if they are the least bit crooked and this sort of thing. And most of the time, or not most of the time, but I mean, there only was one incident where it involved money that I know that a police officer got let go because that, to, like you were talking about, adding an extra couple thousand on there and then splitting it, this sort of thing. Why would a person jeopardize his whole career, and it's a special career, for $3,000 or whatever? It don't make sense.
As the coring, I guess, right?
Yeah, and so, I feel very comfortable, reading through this. And, I mean, it's so much different than it was when it started. Believe you me, it was there. And of course, at one time, we sent somebody over to Germany to actually get a call. But I was working the night that Harry Hansen got killed. And, but anyway, so I myself am very comfortable.
Could one of you give me a background? The Harry, so, just for my own edification, the Harry Hansen, so what happens? This was a burglar response,
First
no
one was-
dog,
first
so he
one was
goes in.
John Flora was
Okay.
in '76.
But a dog wouldn't help him.
Well, methadone clinic was being burglarized, and the suspect,
Yeah.
police got there. Suspect is laying. There's a window, much like that one, right there. He's laying at the bottom at the windowsill with the firearm, and he has a handgun. And there was an open window where he actually broke in, and John Flora came in and looked in the window and around through, and
right.
down he went and killed him. Brenda Flora actually started the first nonprofit for raising money for dogs. The name of it escapes me, but in 1985, so that was when from 76 or 79, all the way up until 1985. 85, Gary Hansen was actually a canine handler, but what happened we were chasing the guy, armed suspect in a shooting, and there's a tree. In fact, the tree is still in Fairview. It's still, the boughs go straight down to the ground, and his dog was in the car, I believe, and he went in and poked his head in the spruce boughs, and boom, he took one here, he goes down, and the dog goes running around. So it kind of changed our philosophy. That's when Gillum came in, and about 85 is really when things really radically changed for the bark and detain philosophy and everything. It really came alive nationwide, really, but Anchorage really became kind of cutting edge at that time because of those two deaths. And
Right.
dogs
So the
could-
idea now is that if you have a canine unit there, you send the dog.
you send the dog in,
Let the
yeah.
dog
A
sort
dog
of like-
is
sort of
cheaper,
like-
is better than a human.
Yeah, flush 'em out, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or do the pinpointing behavior. If the door's shut and you're in here, they'll go to the freshest odor and they'll sit and they're trained. They sit at the door and bark, 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 and they're in there. It's really incredible to watch them work. So that is the premise for now. Most of our work on a nightly basis is tracking people that run from stolen cars and run from stuff. Tracking is really what we train a lot of. But our whole program is based on building searches and burglaries because it's safer to send a dog in than it is a human.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
My general take on this is I think that, I kind of think the questions of money handling are outside of our scope. That's kind of I'm sure there are any number of questions in the meaning of whether people take big cash with them or checks or whatever to pay things. I feel like our focus should be on whether there is an appearance of an ethical conflict or an actual ethical conflict with the department receiving this kind of outside donation. And I think that the way the program is currently structured, I feel very comfortable with it. I'd say my only discomfort would come is if there's a change in the structure where there's somehow more direct benefit flowing to an individual handler from a nonprofit that is not these specific in-kind. I actually like the specificity of the receipt structure right now because it's very clear that what is coming in is equipment, the dog, and then what's the expenses that are needed to procure the dog, and there isn't any kind of flex built into that, where there could be like special lunches for the handlers of the dogs or whatever else there is that could be construed as a personal benefit or could give an appearance of impropriety. So I personally think that the way it's structured, unless there's a change to the structure, I think it's fine. I think it's a great program for that. Good thing that we have, good relationship. Yeah.
And you had mentioned that there was a change on the board now, that there's not a handler on the board, but a liaison, or is that a change that's coming up, or is that already occurred?
It's sort of naturally occurred. We've been talking about it for some time, because there's an appearance of a conflict. If you have somebody from the canine unit that's getting benefit. Now, even if they abstained, my problem as a supervisor was, if a handler's on the board, and let's say Mark is up for going to training, and this is getting down into the weeds a little bit, but this is from a daily operation. If Mark is up for going to training and a handler is on the board, even though they abstain from voting whether Mark should go on a training trip, they could influence that vote a little. And does it ever happen? I don't know. I don't think so, but I didn't like it. I mean, personally, it was just strange. And so when we roundtable it and we discuss what is okay and what is not, it is something we thought, we just shouldn't have. It's money that's coming into the department that is benefiting a unit that you happen to be in, and we just didn't care for it. It just didn't sit well with us. So we didn't have a handler. We had a sergeant that worked at APD on the board, and then someone that worked in the city hall here, and they have since, just in the last month, they have removed themselves from the board, so they're off. So we don't have that anymore. And I've talked to Marshall Johnson, who you'll see his name a lot, and here's the treasurer. And I've talked to Marshall at length about this, and they kind of know that where we're coming from, and all that. So it's not really it's not a tumultuous thing. It's just sort of something that's come up, and so now we think a liaison would be a better way to put it. So that way it could be anybody from the unit. It could be the sergeant that comes in and kind of briefs them on the ongoings. It's very important that we keep them updated on what the success we're having with the dogs, or problems or issues or whatever. They love hearing about it. So that's kind of where it came up. But it's not an issue right now. And it's also kind of a department thing, because if you're sitting on a board, can the department dictate what kind of board you sit on? And so that's kind of an issue we're working through as well. But it's right now, it doesn't matter, because there isn't anybody on the board that's there. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and so anybody who fills those two positions won't necessarily be someone from the police department. Is that what you're?
That's what we're working towards. Yes, that's correct. That's absolutely correct.
That seems to me like a good best practice.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just think
Yeah.
it's a situation where, what if they were, what if the board says, well, maybe we should reconsider this per diem thing, and then you have someone sitting on the board who's getting the per diem or something, then there's a possibility for conflict, or perception of conflict. So it seems like a good best practice to work for.
And really where it came up was we had they don't work at the department anymore, but they were in a canine unit, and it was when I first came into the unit, and they were on the board. And when the question mark first came up was, he and someone else did go to training, and how does that influence? And it didn't sit well with me. So we started the discussion there, and it's no longer an issue. He doesn't work there. And was there any impropriety? Absolutely not. But wouldn't we want to? I mean, how fair is that if you're on the board getting to go to training when I have 5, 6 other handlers that would also like to go to training at some point? So it's those types of things that we monitor and change, and this is one of those things that we discuss.
I think from the perspective of the code, I mean, and you're right. I mean, I think so in a lot of our comments have been poking in 2 different ways. This board oversees sort of like compliance with the code, but a lot of times we also sort of focus, like, even beyond the code. We'll sometimes offer advice, saying, like, I don't think this is not necessarily in violation of the code, but boy, a
Right.
typical citizen looking at this is really
Sure.
there's really going to be trust issues here, right? Thing. So strictly speaking, from the code, I don't see any particular. The only problem I could see would be if you were to think that these fundraisers and the like were not municipal business, or were not related to municipal business, and in which case you're not allowed to use uniforms and resources. But this goes back to the firemen using the boot type stuff,
Oh,
right?
sure.
Everything, and so the ways. So if you were to think, yes, they're raising money for the police, but municipal business means municipal business, and in which case you're using uniforms and city equipment for a fundraiser that's not, for an organization that strictly speaking is not a part of the city, and strictly speaking is not conducting city business. If you were to, and I'm not sure I'm looking at it that way, but if you were to look at it that way, that would be, as far as I can tell, the only relevant section of the code that may be a little bit squirrely here, right? Also, when you take the pictures with the donor, if you're in uniform with the dog, again, you're using city resources. Now, again, you could get on the mayor's list, right? The mayor, there is an exception as a safe harbor now that if you get put on the mayor's list, then occasional uses for fundraising activities is permissible. But
Yeah, and Terry, I was gonna say, because there are those two distinct, the uniform came up in the political activity arena.
right.
In the fundraising arena, the easiest way was to get the municipal manager to say it's fine.
Right.
So there's actually two different ones.
Yeah, well, though it's resources, right? So
Right.
presumably that would include
Yeah.
the uniforms, right? And
Yeah.
so, but you'd have to look at it that way. I mean, and in some sense, and so you could say, it's related to city business and that they're raising money and in some sense directly pay. So in some sense, the things that make me most uncomfortable about this situation, just broadly ethically speaking, are the ones that maybe save you as far as this provision in the code, because to some degree the interlinking between what they're doing and they're literally in some cases paying the officers, right? I mean, which makes me uncomfortable, to be honest, in some ways. But in other ways, they're clearly involved in municipal business. It looks to me like a public-private partnership, to be perfectly honest here, right?
Right.
So in that case, if you look at it that way, and again, I'm just poking at the tires, that's the only part of the code that I could really see would be potentially in violation here with this setup. I mean, more broadly, ethically speaking, I think it probably would be better to do it as just a big grant, right, and everything. But if there's pragmatic, but I don't think the code requires doing it as a grant. But you can see as you get into the part where you have sort of just think about it, when you're talking about this public-private partnership. The downside then is it means it's starting to sound like what happens on the public side is in part being determined by the private side. So is there going to be a training? Is the training going to be funded or not? Who's making that decision? It sounds like it's very much as much the board of directors of DFD as it is the chief of police, and that doesn't sound quite right. You know what I'm saying? It seems like those kind of all of those kind of decisions should be public decisions made by public officials who are directly accountable to the mayor and the assembly. And this is always the problem you get with public-private partnerships, right? You sort of with the partnership also comes influence and an increasing amount of sort of discretionary authority on the part of the private entity that's in the partnership, which would all disappear if you just simply had, here's a big block grant, this is what we came up with last year, we give it to the city, it's earmarked for the K-9 unit, done. So who decides what happens with those funds? APD 100%. Now the code doesn't require you to do it that way, but you can see people who suggest doing it as a big grant, you can see why. I think, it would, from a lot of people's perspectives, it would certainly, from an ethical perspective, be cleaner and neater to do it that way, because it would firewall out the private organization from the municipal's business, the business of the municipality.
Well, I guess the only thing, you've touched on a lot of different things, and I think that's the purpose of it, but the only thing I can say is if we put in the request for our training equipment and buying trip, it's not they don't, they approve or deny, and deny, and we have those discussions, but, they fund it, you know what I mean? So I don't, it's us
What
putting in the
would happen if they
request.
didn't fund it? What if it was the board that said, we're not going to fund this one? Would it decrease the chances of it happening?
Decrease the chance of what happened.
Whatever you were asking to be funded. So let's say it's a training, so the one with the send this guy to Gillette, right, for
Yeah.
the training.
Well, I can think of two instances where I wanted to send 3 people to a dog buying trip. Now, this next one I'm going to actually send 4 because there's 3 trainers and a sergeant, and that is always. But these are the discussions happen before the requests come in, and it's Marshall, this is what's going to happen, and I explain it, and oh my gosh, it's going to be expensive and blah blah blah. Well, these are the reasons why we need to do this, and so I explain why, and they fund it. So there's a discussion that goes on with this, but I don't know, that's the closest thing I can come to. Equipment, dog buying trip, all of it is, I've never had a situation where they didn't. There was a couple with how many can go on.
Right.
But that's, we explain why, and it's important that they do that, and.
But notice if you did it as if they just gave you a grant, you wouldn't have to be consulting a non-municipal agency to find out whether you can actually send the number of people that you want to send. You would have the money, and it would be entirely at the discretion of APD to figure out how do we best, use the resources that we have. Can we afford to send 3, or can we afford to send 4? That decision would be entirely within the municipality at that point.
How do we do this with, I'm thinking about parallel kind of non-municipal organizations that support municipal activities.
Like
specifically
Parks Foundation.
Or like boosters at a school, who pay for something for the school, or, the Parks Foundation pays for something. I mean, it seems to me like a similar kind of relationship, the way it's structured, that there is a outside organization that raises money, that does pay for things that are part of a municipal project, that does have some decision-making authority over that, and their entire function is to raise those funds and support a municipal function that otherwise wouldn't be funded. So is this different?
And they're heavily involved, the Parks
Yeah.
Foundation.
Mhm.
Yes, I'm not sure whether I think they may do their thing by grant, but I think the point you're talking about, Terry, is they are heavily involved in
Yeah.
the direction of where those funds go.
I don't I think of like school boosters fund groups that directly buy uniforms for school teams, right? I mean,
Mhm.
and maybe that's not the most direct analogy, but I'm just thinking of other instances
Yeah.
where there are these outside organizations. Again, it seems to me like it's a very parallel structure that we have in place, this
Yeah,
kind of
right.
restriction on other support organizations
Well, that's
that work with municipalities.
quite frankly, that's Brenda Flora. I mean, Brenda Flora she came, without Brenda, we wouldn't have had our first dog, or dogs with NS. It wouldn't have happened if her husband hadn't been killed. She wouldn't have raised the money. She took it upon herself, as the stories go, that she would have, she did that. So, talk about it. It's pretty influential that she did this, and now the roles have reversed. Now we have this organization that really hasn't said no to anything. Do we consult them? I do as a courtesy, because it's their volunteers, and they do want to be involved, and they do want to know what the happenings are, but they're very positive influence as far as donating money. So I don't know.
And there's no restriction on donations to municipality. Like if I wanted to just directly donate a dog to the police department, is there any restriction on? There's no restriction on that, right? So we're
Donation of
to a
personal
certain degree,
property.
it's not like there is no restriction on some organization coming and donating at their discretion to the
I guess,
municipality on a regular or
not in the
sporadic
code, but would you be
basis.
comfortable with reading a story in the newspaper in which he needed to go get a dog and you gave him your credit card and a blank check?
I think
and
that
said,
happens all the time. If I said I'll pay for this for the municipality, that's a donation. Would it be better if we taxed more and spent, we were able to buy those resources out of the,
Oh,
that's
yeah,
a bigger
but would
question,
would it be better for
but-
you to give the money to APD and then have APD manage the money and then pay for things, or is it
That's a
that?
bigger question about donation to the community in general. If we
Right.
have a blanket across the board policy that says you cannot make in-kind donations to the municipality, you must donate money, which then is allocated at the discretionary authority of the department to which you've donated it,
Well,
that would be a different
I
world.
was going
but we
to say, I
don't
think
have
some of the
that.
donation stuff does have
Yeah.
other public process,
Yeah.
assembly and stuff, but we're probably getting too far afield here.
Yes, because I don't see you as being not in compliance with the code, which is
Yeah.
probably like the bottom line. Yeah, the rest of it is just food for thought in terms of, to the degree that you get, it sounds like you've been maybe getting some suggestions elsewhere from the municipality to do it as a grant instead. And you could, at least see from an ethical, at least in terms of like the appearance of trustworthiness, you might see why someone might prefer to have it done as sort of like a grant that's then 100% controlled with an APD instead of sort of at this
But
partnership.
can I say, I also like Becky's point that by not doing it just as a $50,000 grant, you have all the other accountability by, 3 dogs, 10 pieces of equipment and a trip. So that I hadn't thought of it in that regard before. So it's just a balancing thing. But I guess on balance here, that the board for the most part feels that this does not present an ethical problem or an insurmountable ethics challenge here in terms of gifts.
The big advantage of doing it like they're doing it, the big advantage is 100% of the money that's donated goes to the program. Where if they were to run it in the city like we do, the city takes anywhere from, the cheapest I've seen them do it, and it's on all buildings and everything else, is the cheapest is 10%, and a lot of it, it's 40%.
Oh, yeah, and then
Yeah,
is
they
there
take-
personnel time, is there a grant administrator
Right.
hired, and
This
then
way,
is
they're
paid directly by the
100%,
organization, like?
yeah, 100% of the money that's donated.
Equipment.
And I know when there have been times that they have come out and donated money to the police department for the dollars for the canine unit. They just simply direct it right over to Dollars for Dogs. They don't even want it in there, because of that reason. We want it all to go to the canine program.
And that's a good point too, the people that want to donate now have a clean channel of doing it, instead
Yeah.
of dropping off dollars to the front desk of a police
Yeah.
force, which they probably can't accept.
Well, it's surprising that there are checks that come through the front counter that I would come to work and there would be, somebody just stopped in and said Dollars for Dogs,
Yeah.
APD Canine Unit, blah, 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 and the check is made out to Dollars for Dogs. I quickly take it over to Marshall and say there, but it does happen, people. But it's really good because they know right where they want to go. People are fanatical about dogs. We've done demos and Dollars for Dogs has received, checks for, $20,000, $12,000, $15,000 from, from folks that just really, that enjoy the dogs and they like, it's just
And I
their
guess,
thing.
Terry, there's the extra layer of protection too, is those checks are going to another group, and these officers don't know necessarily who the donors are, who just gave $20,000. So you've got that layer of
Right.
protection. Remember,
Right.
we had the blind trust for the officer who was shot.
Right.
So. Well, we've got two more things.
Oh, yes, well, thank you for coming,
Yeah,
so, but
thank
you.
I think, can I say, because you do want a preliminary answer, I mean, so it sounds to me like the consensus of the board is that there is not a violation, that we don't perceive any violation of the city ethics code in the program. So is that right? Is that the sense of the board here?
I think there is structure to
Which,
it.
it's just you three today.
Oh, yeah, right, so yes, so you have, for what it's worth, you have the board's blessing,
What is the process? What happens next? This is the first time before your board, and I've enjoyed it. It's
Oh, that's true, because this was a request for advisory,
advisory.
so I guess we'll fire up and that's actually, we should, we'll fire up an advisory opinion for you. Basically, in the advisory opinion, we'll sort of explain what you told us. It'll like to talk a little bit about this program. And then basically it'll end with the conclusion that the board finds no violation with your program in terms of the municipal code of ethics. And then that's important because that's your safe harbor then. If someone, if any citizen were into the future were to file a complaint against you for your program, as long as it's consistent with the details as you provided with us today,
Right.
then that's your safe harbor. You said, look, I took this to the board, and here's their advisory opinion saying that this is okay.
Oh, great.
But Terry, can I say that the consensus and/or if you do a vote today should be what he can rely on, and that the opinion is simply going to paper that?
That's
because
right.
they need to get their trip together if they're going to be able to go do it.
Yeah,
Versus
right.
wait for us for a month for an opinion, which it will take a month.
So he'll be lucky.
So
I think
whether,
we'll-
So why don't we firm that up a little bit? So why don't we actually vote on that? So do we have now, Ted? You've got to abstain from this.
Yeah.
But for the and do we still have a quorum?
Yes,
we
we have a
have
quorum,
three, right?
three.
So do we have a motion then to do we have a motion regarding the dogs for the donuts for dogs, the dollars for dogs?
Separate nonprofit.
That's right. Yeah, where's that nonprofit? Right, that's what I'm.
Very not affiliated supporting
That's right. That one's okay.
For the retired dogs. I would move that I don't know kind of form this as motion to take. Is it a motion that we issue an advisory opinion, or is it a motion that we conclude?
Why don't we do a conclude one
Okay.
so you can rely on
I
that
would
pretty-
move that we conclude, based on the details about Dollars for Dogs that we've received today, that there is no conflict with or violation of the ethics code in the program as it's structured today.
Do we have a second? Okay. All those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye. No? Okay, very good. So that passes. So there you go. So
Okay.
you've got the official word from the board. And then, yes, in a month, or two, you'll get a write-up thing. You'll get a write-up thing. And again, that's, you know, that, and just FYI, that will be a public document too, because you waive confidentiality, so that will go up on the website as well. But generally for you, that should be a good thing in the sense that, you know, if people read that, they'll both learn about this program, which actually might be good advertising. But two, they'll also know that you did come to us seeking our advice and that we said it was okay. So generally, it's good publicity, if anything, for your organization.
That sounds terrific. Are what I provided to you today going to be part of that public record?
I don't think so. It will probably include a
It's in
summary.
the court file. This would be in the court.
Yes, I
In
keep it
our
in the file.
ethics board file,
So
unless
that-
there is a reason not to. Is there anything in here?
I was just gonna say, if it's gonna go up on a website, I would probably wanna take out, redact the officers' names, or maybe even, you know, some of
No,
that.
it's just part of the
be-
ethics board file.
So it'll be in the clerk's office or
So it's
filed
not
away
public.
somewhere. But
No, that's
no,
fine.
what will go up on the web is probably the opinion will probably include a summary of the program
That's
as
fine.
you've presented it
Perfect.
to us,
Yeah,
and
no,
then
that's
again, but not these
So it
big.
could be like FOIA, but not, but it could if it was in the police department's hands as well, right? Because of the public information.
Oh, yeah, this is all public
So, yeah, that would
anyway,
be-
so-
So it wouldn't- it doesn't make it any more
If someone
public than,
Yeah,
First.
yeah, that's it. If it was going up on a website for that, I would wanna tell Mark Haywood that this, you know, his name is
Just
in there.
by the
or
way.
redacted,
No.
Or, and then also, Dollars for Dogs, when I talk to them tonight, I would like to tell them that, you know, I used their forms and the whole, I'm gonna explain the process and everything, but, I just, the notification is all, is
Great.
So, thank you very much. This
Well,
has been-
thank you, and
this
thanks for
has
your
been a
time and your
pleasure.
service to the city. and
No,
we really
no problem.
appreciate it.
This was enjoyable, and if, like I say, if I'm on the Muni website, if you guys ever have any questions or anything like that, that's terrific. So,
Great.
and Dee, we'll talk later, I guess, and then we'll go from there. But thank you very much.
And when we say we talk later, we'll probably need to bring this information to the municipal manager
Do it this week.
today, probably, maybe, potentially later today.
I'm ready.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll stay in my uniform.
Okay.
It's hot out there. they're cold in the winter, hot in the summer. Anyway, thank you.
And if I could do this, I need to prepare a little bit for the one that would have been at 1 o'clock. If Lisa, if you could handle the AWU
Yeah,
matter.
I mean, it's perfectly fine. I don't know, he's been waiting for a while. I'm wondering if the best course of action would be to make sure everyone reads what he wrote. What I originally anticipated doing, I've talked with him before, I thought maybe I could tease some of the key issues up for you guys before he comes in. Do you wanna do that, or do you, I think everyone should read what.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
do that then.
It's just a
Let's-
one-pager.
It's not terribly complex, but he'd prefer to bring it to the board.
Which one was that?
7D.
7D, everyone.
Yeah, it's 7B's Rising Tide and Water Resource Too.
Oh yes, I read this. I've read this
Oh,
one
yeah,
already.
This one's really interesting.
This one's
Yeah,
fascinating.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had notes on the next one, which I'd like to grab while you do
Okay,
this one.
do you wanna tell him, he's going, okay,
Bring him in.
tell him that we'll be, just a few more minutes. Okay. That's all right. And when you guys are done reading it, I can kinda tell you just a few things that he and I talked about when we got a conversation.
Which one is that?
It's right before 7D, so it's 7D, it's the second page in it. But
Is he going to remain employed by AWU?
he's gonna remain employed.
Okay.
And his job, I'm sure you're wondering, is his current job, because that seems to be with this analysis. He runs a lab, and his lab, he has a lab, and what he does is he reports and determines what the results are of all the, like, the drinking water standards
Yeah.
and the wastewater and the discharge points, he just runs the lab.
Okay.
So that is
he's gonna keep
critical.
doing that, but then he's going to start a competing business.
Well, yes, he's going to start a competing business with the municipality because the water, not only is.
Yeah, how
the water is
terrifying
really
is that?
good.
The person testing the water wants to breathe everyone.
I know.
Guys.
So that's what it is. They're
It's a
concerned.
really interesting point.
It's like something else we should know.
Well, I'm
He's
wondering,
taking the
does
water.
he have any special insight into the fact that there's a better water source than somewhere else, because he's in charge of like,
Well, I mean,
this-
that is our water. I mean, our water is a clean water anyway.
Yeah.
That's our water.
So we
For
get
drinking
water from anywhere else, or only
We have
Equipment?
clean water.
But only
That's
Equipment
right.
water?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's only Equipment. We have
So
that
he
great-
wants
and it's gonna be even better.
non-fluorinated.
It's gonna be even better.
Okay.
And what he's doing, his leg off of his competition is that his competitors, of which there are apparently 8 or so, I didn't
Really?
realize this, but his particular water is gonna be better than our water, because rather than doing a chemical treatment process, he uses a chemical treatment process where he's gonna squish this water through some type of really weird meshy thing that he's worked with some, organization on. He's gonna push the water through this, like this, physical barrier, and it's going to remove remove whatever turbidities, I think he said. So that's his, it's a mechanical processor, it's a chemical processor.
Right.
And,
There's 7 other or 8 other companies?
yeah,
Does that include the water?
Yes. And they apparently, he will purchase raw water from the municipality, from AWO. As opposed to what these other guys do, is they don't purchase purely raw water.
Yeah.
They purchase water that has had some level of treatment.
Oh, so
It's
it's already
horrible
gone
there. I mean, I
through
learned all
some
about
filtration.
flocculation and all this kind of stuff.
So it seems, on reading this, the main thing I started thinking about was the prohibition about having a contract if you work in the administrative department that is administering the contract.
That's interesting,
So would
Terry.
AWU be the administrative department?
Well, here's what would
Administrative
happen. Here's Terry that I understand what's happening. What would need to be done, if he does this, would say we're going anyway. But what I understand is that he needs an access point. Because apparently he's somehow purchased this water from the city. And all these other guys, these other competitors, they also have access points that have been built out. Who builds them out? Well, this city builds them out. And apparently, and I asked that question, we actually talked to his boss too, like, how does that work? Who gets to do that? Like if Kathleen decides she wants to run a cultivator business, who gets an active state, just take it, because anybody who wants to do it gets to do it. And basically what the supervisor said is that so long as there's certain specifications met, they have to build out an access point and then they put it out for bid.
Okay.
It would go out, I think, through AWU. He'll be able to answer that. It doesn't have anything to do with that process of, the process of going out for bid and then come bid and all that kind of stuff. It's totally separate and distinct from what he does. He will have nothing to do with, apparently when you go and you purchase water, someone needs to keep track of how much you purchase, going in and going out to see how much you have to pay for it. He doesn't have anything to do with that either. He has a pretty separate and distinct little job, but his job is nevertheless still enabled. And so unlike the Joanne Inglis situation where she was interested in pursuing outside employment that really pertained to her full job in the land use department as opposed to her current job in the employment department, his job would be water related. However, it is pretty separate and distinct, but he can tell you guys a little bit more about that. And Terry, you should ask your question, how does that process of contracting and whatnot work? He would hold that contract and really would have to put it up for bid so long as receiving an access point would meet the requisite, threshold for build up.
Wait, he'd have to file a notice of solicitation, right? So.
I don't know, let's talk to him, but I think we should, I had a conversation with him, and then I had a pretty extensive conversation with his boss, but my brain is going to Jill and Ingla's situation with a little bit of a twist.
Yeah, no, that makes
But
a
we
lot
want to
of sense.
explore that
Good
twist.
questions,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it is,
Right.
but we want to explore that twist to see, what is his role, would he give any special treatment, does he have any confidential information?
Yeah, would
So-
his confidential rate and help his business?
Yeah,
Like,
and he
if
kind of
you know,
said
it's-
no, and he kind of explained why, because his role is sort of limited in what he does, but you guys should ask him some of that.
Okay, well, why don't we bring him on, so
Okay.
everyone had a chance to look at this.
It's applicable, I mean, I feel like
Well, I don't know.
Here he
how
is.
you- I don't know how you can actually schedule all these things
The last time
until
I
you
had
ask
water,
a
we
question that leads
expected,
into
so-
10 other things.
Yeah, so here's Rob from.
Where would you like me to sit?
Oh,
Right
sit right
there.
there, please.
Okay.
Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Some of you've read, I think everybody has read the little blurb that you sent over to Dee.
Oh, yeah.
Which she sent over to me, and I guess, go ahead, Terry. Terry's in charge of this. I guess I don't know how you want to
Oh.
take this away, but I know we've all looked at it. We have a few questions I think that the board would like to ask. I don't know how you'd like to begin, but I think everyone's interested in what you currently do for a living.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about we got a sense of what your proposed enterprise
Sure.
here looks like. Could you tell us a little bit about your job and how that job would sort of relate to the business that you're proposing?
It doesn't really relate at all.
Okay.
I currently working for Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility. I manage all of their environmental compliance monitoring programs for wastewater. So all of the three wastewater plants, Girdwood, Eagle River, and Asplin. I'm in charge of the compliance monitoring programs for those three facilities. So I schedule with the facility superintendents all of the required monitoring that we need their operators to collect samples for. And then we either analyze some of those samples in-house at our lab, or a portion of them go to one of the local contract laboratories. And so we do that for the wastewater side. And then also on the water side, we have required weekly bacteriological testing throughout the Anchorage distribution system. So my group manages that in conjunction with the distribution operations operators who actually go out and pull the samples. And then my staff analyze those in-house at our laboratory, and then we report that data to the state of Alaska. So that's the.
Okay. So you're on the output side of the story then, right? So so you're
Yeah, I'm
measuring
way on the
wastewater. You're
downstream
downstream,
side.
right? You're all wastewater. So
Yeah.
you don't do any work in terms of Lake Eklutna and the city drawing water out of there, or that
You know, I
side?
do raw water testing. We're required as part of the required monitoring that we have to do for drinking water.
Mhm.
Some of it's on finished water, some of
Okay.
it's ahead of time on the raw water.
Okay.
So, like for cryptosporidium, it's a new emerging, so to speak, type of contaminant that the EPA is trying to get occurrence data nationally for. So on that is raw water. So we have to test that for cryptosporidium, giardia, and E. coli.
And it's both monitoring for the drinking water side and also for the wastewater side.
Correct. Yeah. But the monitoring you do on the drinking water, for the raw water, anything you come up with there, that's public information.
all
Also, that's the
public.
public. So one concern would be here is that you gain insight, unique insight, because of your job about, let's say, the raw water
Yeah.
situation at Eklutna.
All of any piece of data, whether we're required to sample for it or we just choose to sample for it, if we choose to sample for it, we still have to submit that data to the state of Alaska. Yep.
The main concern I have is, could you tell me about, as you create this enterprise and secure a contract, would that be the administrative division of the city that's awarding and administrating the contract?
Would that be and you're asking, Terry, about the contract for the purchase of raw water from the
Anything that
city,
you're
or-
going to do involved with, anything that your enterprise would have to do with any
I'm
contract.
sorry, I'm trying to
They
understand the
will
question
regulate
better.
in any way.
I don't.
So who's going to administer and award the contract to, if you're either purchasing the water or any other contract that you would be?
There shouldn't be any award of any contracts associated with this, except for when it comes time for construction. And I don't know.
Are you getting a permit to tie up to the?
No.
No?
No, this'll be, have to be approved through the AWW board, which may or may not have to go through church assembly. I don't think it would, because there's 8 other bottlers up there that get water from AWW, and I don't think any of that had to go through assembly approval or anything like that. So really, all it is, 8 different bottlers have come to A1 and said, well, we want you to be responsible for treating the water, and then we want to get it before you chlorinate it and fluoridate it. We want to get it right there. And so there was a number of them that came to AWW. So AWW constructed a fill station
Okay.
out at Eklutna for them that has a valve and a meter for each of them. So that when they come out, they have basically a padlock to unlock their cam lock fitting, and they hook that hose up to it, and they fill their tankers with water. And then there's a starting and ending meter read, so that gets recorded so that they can calculate the volume that they took. And so it's really this similar thing to that, except for we just want it before they add chemicals to the water.
Could you tell us about that process? So you tell them you want access into the lake water, and then the city builds it, like, not for free, right? Or how?
Well,
how's that
that's
work?
yet to be determined. You know,
Okay.
I don't know entirely how the funding of those projects go. I'm so far outside engineering. My guess is that what'll happen is our company will pay to engineer it. Well, let me start over. The water comes into Eklutna, to the water treatment plant, and it goes through a structure right here called ERS, the Energy Recovery Station. So it drops that down from about, I want to say 300 PSI, right around there, down to about 80 PSI.
Okay.
So in capturing the head off that, they're able to capture some, recover some energy off that. So right between that building and the first treatment building, is where we would like to construct a fill station. There's a nice big parking lot there and such, and it would really work well once the head's been knocked down off that, and AWW's created some energy off it. to simply provide an access point from that raw water line that we can fill up off of. And then it'll head into the building and go into their flocculation basins, where at the head of that, they inject what's called a first stage coagulant that allows the turbidity in there, so to speak, to start coagulating to those chemicals. And then after that goes into sedimentation basins, and the flock that was created in the flock basins then settles out by decelerating. So it goes into a larger volume, removes some of the energy from it, and that turbidity settles out, and the bulk of it. And then, so there's a first stage and a second stage coag that they add to that. And I don't know, I'm not a surface water treatment expert, but at some point then they add a flock aid, which further helps flock the turbidity, and then they add a filter aid after that helps to, they run it through these natural anthracite bed filters. They're essentially different layers of sand and particular types of minerals that as they let that water just settle through there by gravity. And eventually those start to occlude, and so they have to backwash those solids off of there. And so it's after it's gone through those filters that AWW adds chlorine and fluoride to the water. And so it's right at that point just prior to disinfection and fluoridation that they have a line feeding their bottled water manifold.
I see, and you want to come even before that, even
Correct.
before all the kind of
Yeah,
turbidity stuff,
I want
right?
to treat the water ourselves,
Right.
but we're going to use a purely physical separation process that utilizes a new technology called hollow fiber membranes, and so simply by forcing the water through high pressure through these hollow fiber membranes, they're able to remove the solids that normal surface water treatment plants would have to add chemicals in order to remove. And the Eklutna Lake water, as far as I'm concerned, is the finest source water on earth. And there's no water that gets fed back into that lake except from the watershed and the glacier. And that's almost unheard of in source waters throughout the United States, that there isn't some method of water getting back in that unfortunately brings with it unregulated contaminants that aren't removed through any wastewater treatment process. So there's a huge number of contaminants that are not required to be tested for nor removed in a wastewater treatment process. And we call that pass-through. And that's what I want to avoid, because most bottled waters are simply municipal tap waters that don't have to meet all of what this water could meet if it was held to that regard.
I thought the reason why you wound up chemically treating the water because there were certain things that you couldn't physically filter out. So when you think about backpacking, like when you any physical filter, they always say like, well, this will probably get 99,
But it won't get arsenic.
but it won't. There's certain things. Well, there's certain things like if you want the 100%, there's certain bacteria and like that might get through it. You need to hit it with the iodine or the rotten tasting stuff.
Well, in 36 months of raw water sampling on Eklutna Lake, we've never had a single detection for Cryptosporidium or Giardia. Which,
Right, Giardia, that's the other. Right.
I don't know how much hiking or you've done around the world, but I mean, I've drank Giardia too many times to
Yeah, I've
count.
had Giardia.
Yeah.
Terrible.
And so the fact that Eklutna Lake has, in 36
Good weight
sampling
loss
events, we've
tactic.
never detected in there, that tells you what high quality source water that really is. And actually the Eklutna water treatment plant, in terms of what they're asked to do for that water, it's pretty minimal.
Such good water.
Yeah, we have typical influent turbidities coming into the plant, less than 5 what are called nephelometric turbidity units, or NTUs. I visited a plant in Kentucky, a water treatment plant. Their average influent turbidities were 4,000. So that tells you it's
There's
just
a lot of stuff going on.
yeah, and they have to hit that. And the higher the turbidity, generally speaking, the higher you have to dose your chemicals at to remove that. Speaking of something like arsenic, arsenic's not treatable through the normal treatment process. So if we were to have but arsenic's also typically not a surface water issue.
Right.
It's usually associated with
Groundwater,
groundwater. And so they've developed different technologies to treat arsenic and remove that. But fortunately, we don't have to deal with that type of equipment.
So, and I enjoyed that. So to get back to the ethics side of it then,
Yeah.
One, then there's no contracts with the city involved here, or at least your business would not be being awarded any contracts.
I don't believe so. No, I wouldn't be awarded. I would, if anything, I would have to sign a contract to purchase water.
Right.
To give a WWU money, but there will be no like award of contracts to my company through a WWU.
But there, you mentioned the and I was trying to explain this to these guys just for a few minutes before you came in, this couple sentences that you have in your write-up, where you basically are gonna need the construction of a small diameter, kind of an access point.
Yeah,
Would
yeah,
you
yeah.
need to be able to take the water from the recovery station, you need to be able to take this raw water out
Correct.
and for your
Hook a valve
purposes.
up- hook a hose up to a valve, yeah.
So there's going to be a construction of a small diameter pipe, and then the next paragraph, you talk about how your company understands that there's going to be costs associated with that. And what you had explained to me when you and I first talked, I think it's important for these guys to understand, is how you understand that process will work. Like the municipality will have to make the decision to build that pipe, and they will figure out how to construct it, probably by bidding it out to somebody.
Right,
So
Well,
you
and
would
that was
have-
generally what I was told by an
Yes.
engineer at AWU. I said, because not a lot of times, do people pre-engineer things and then come to AWU, and then AWU approves that, but then they put their engineering out on the street to be bid for construction. That's just the general process I've told it will likely follow, because AWW wouldn't want us putting it out on the street to have somebody come construct something on their property. So my guess is that my engineers would design it all, get that engineering approved through AWW's engineering group, and then if it requires board approval, it'd be presented to the board, and at some point it would be approved by the AWW general manager, and then it would be, I was told it would, more than likely, AWW would put that out to bid through the contractors that they would want or have faith in to construct something like that correctly. And then the cost for construction may be borne
Back on you, right?
back on us 100%.
But you wouldn't be bidding for that contract
No.
then? You would be laying out the specifications of what you need.
Yes, our engineers
and
would
the city would
design
approve
that,
and they'd
submit
put it up
that
for a
to-
bid, but
yeah.
you wouldn't then be.
No, I wouldn't be
companies
involved in the
bidding
the
to
awarding
build.
or bidding process in any way. That would all be through AWW's engineering group.
And that's a process that's open to anyone, so if there's another person who is unrelated to AWU who said, hey, I wanna do this
Yeah.
water thing too, they showed up and said, I also would like an access point, so they would be treated the same way by AWU.
Yeah.
I think that's what's happened with.
Yeah, that's what's
Whether
happened
it's with-
already,
with
except
them doing it.
AWW's borne the entire cost of constructing that.
Well, imagine, maybe they pass it on in the metered rate for the.
Right, and that's,
It's the
that's
same.
what, after,
Yeah,
you know,
labor
I get
recovery
cleared
over time.
with you, then we could start discussing, but
Yeah.
it was so early on that when I first started discussing this with Brett, and originally, it was in a different context originally. I had wanted to get the water from the Eklutna Power Station, because our eventual plans are to build a 1 million gallon a day treatment and bottling plant. And so we don't want to haul 5,000 gallons at a time. We would just soon get the water via a pipeline. So for the last year, I've been in negotiation with the Eklutna Operating Committee to construct a fill station out at the power plant. And then once we got our initial operation going at 20,000 gallons per day, then we would start into the development of a small diameter transmission line that would go about a third of a mile through the DOT right of way down to a mental health trust property that we would be leasing. And eventually the Eklutna Operating Committee, they got a new chairman, and he just said, well, that's not what we do. We don't provide water to people, and you'll have to go look someplace else. So that was when I finally decided that I'd have to come to AWW and start looking at kind of trucking the water, which we were initially going to do for our startup operation, but we wanted that to be from the same entity. We would eventually build a pipeline to that. So we're looking to get into operation and eventually either expand our operation by trucking or expand our operation by negotiating successfully with the Power Authority.
With your process though, Rod, for working with the municipality about this access point issue, it's the same process that anybody else would have to follow, correct? Like
Yeah.
if Becky wanted to start up her own little water business,
Yeah.
or I did, we would go through the same thing.
Exact process.
Same process.
And what
your-
8 other groups have already done.
8 other groups have already done. In your group, in your role, in, you're running your regulatory program or your monitoring program in your lab that you run, you have nothing to do with anything up in that location whatsoever.
Nope.
You're just dealing with looking at the drinking water standards and whether or not they can comply with, and the state and federal wastewater treatment standards, whether or not those have been complied with.
Okay, I think that's. Does anyone have any other questions? That was the only, because the only main concern I saw was this possibility of word of contract that, you know, since you work for AV, you would be strictly speaking in the department that would be awarding and administrating contract. If your company were to be bidding on some municipal contract regarding this enterprise, but it sounds like that's not going to happen, and so. I think
Yeah,
that's-
it's almost,
I
you know,
think-
where most people want to sign a contract with the community to have the community pay them, I'm proposing something where I'm going to be paying the community money to purchase water.
Yeah, right.
And hopefully
No,
create
and
some
that's,
jobs.
yeah, this is about
some more
awarding
tax base.
contracts, so, yeah. Yeah,
Terry, what are you looking at?
oh, where am I? I am in 025 E4, E5.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I would encourage.
Stay on this page for the next one, too.
Award the municipal contract shall be made to a person or any. So that award is not gonna go to him at all, so it just needs to apply, right?
I think that's the
Yeah.
key. I mean, I
That's the
think,
key.
because do notice, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that B is about the process. So A should not be read then as being just a process issue. That even someone who's not necessarily involved in the process, if you're in, at least the code was laid out to say if you're even in that department, I guess the idea is already, the appearance is already
Very
too
good point.
close.
Very good.
Because it's easy to read A as if it's B, but the code wouldn't have A and B if they were to mean the same thing.
What we're reading, Rob, is there's this provision that says award of a municipal contract shall not be made to a person or entity governed by 1.15.025, which is the ethics code is applied to new employees. And it says unless neither the municipal employee nor a member of the employee's immediate family works for the administrative department awarding or administrative contract. And then it goes on to say neither the municipal employee nor a member of the employee's immediate family is defined as such and such takes any additional activities in the preparation of the solicitation award or municipal administration of the contract. The key here is, Terry emphasized, is that the contract's not gonna be awarded to you at all.
Mhm.
It's really the municipality is making a decision, and I don't know what the criteria are that the municipality uses to say, yes, we're gonna construct an access point for this person or not. But, I don't know what they are, but I don't think, I think they, my understanding, and this is from Brett, because we did chat briefly with Brett, is that Brett basically said, yeah, there's, you know, we have to do it if certain criteria are met, and as long as those are met, we have to do it. We don't get to say, oh, we're not gonna do it for Rob, we're not gonna do it for Becky, but we will do it for Kathleen. There's certain there's criteria that go into a decision about whether or not they need to do the build out.
And it sounds like the city would not be awarding you, where we would be getting a problem if you were to give the specs to the city about that pipeline, and then your company were to bid
Oh, yeah.
to actually make that pipeline. Then we would have a problem because you'd be working for the same department
Or
that's
if
going to be.
there was somehow a bid process for access to a food mill, like that was one of my questions.
Yes.
If there's somehow like a limited number of
Mhm.
access points and they put one out to bid every year or
Right.
something.
And in actuality, AWW is holding now about 17 million gallons a day worth of water rights that, legally speaking, they shouldn't be, because they're not utilizing them.
Yeah, they
If
should
the-
be using them
If the
regularly.
commissioner of the DNR was, you know, on top of all those issues all over the state, he would ideally look at those and go, well, you know, the original estimates of what your population growth was gonna be didn't ferret out, and we can't really award you this much water. But when you have the power authority that's already using more than they're supposed to out of the lake, makes AWW's allocation look pretty minuscule.
And it sounds to me also that the nature of your job is remote enough that it doesn't at least seem obvious to me that you're somehow acquiring, you know, unique and proprietary type information that's not available to the public. Even the things that you find in terms of testing raw water, that's all made public information, so.
And we did ask, it was actually not Brett, it was David Persinger, because Brett was out
Oh,
of town.
that's right, I'm sorry, Brett.
Yeah.
He was acting.
Yeah, and asked him would there be any unfair advantage here, any access to information, confidential information that would help him in this effort? Anything different between him and the other 8 people? And David said no, that he didn't see any problems, so.
And I think his key for that's right, he was, what I mentioned earlier, is that he really said that, you know, we really can't discriminate against anybody for these things. If someone wants to come in and they want an access point because they're, you know, starting up a business, so long as certain threshold criteria met, they gotta do it.
Yeah.
So there's not the discretion to say yes or no, so long as certain threshold criteria met. I don't know what those are, but, you know.
But that's an administrative issue,
It's
right? That's not an ethics issue at
Yeah.
that point, right? So, does anyone else have any comments? I don't.
No, I mean, I think my general thinking is I feel like this is fine. I would say for future cautions, be mindful of anything that might come up in this process where there is a municipal contract that's somehow bid on, if that ever comes up, or if your position or role at AWU changes and somehow there is potential for you to be privy to information which is not available to the general public, which could relate to the business that you're conducting outside of the AWU employment. Those are the 2 things I'd say be mindful of going forward, where there could be an ethics issue in the future, but right now I don't see one.
Yeah, I think that's great. And then the other thing that I was thinking about, this reminds me of another one that we worked on, and we talked about this, Rob, is that when you're doing these types of things, keep your outside work completely separate from your inside work, municipal resources,
Yeah,
municipal time,
email,
municipal computers,
phone.
but, you know, all that kind of stuff. Just don't use it for your water business. So.
And do we need it, are we doing an opinion on this one, or is it just simply?
This was a request for an advisor, and we
Yeah,
probably
sure.
should, you two, we should probably give you an opinion, because the opinion will provide a safe harbor for you, that
Right,
you
and
should
that's,
know that
that's,
once you have the
that's
opinion from the
what Brett was
board.
looking for too,
Yeah.
because that covers all of us.
That's right, so yeah, we will write an opinion then. It sounds like the sense, Lisa will.
I'll be happy to write that.
And is the time, and what's your sense about the timeliness of this one? Would it be better to
find
have
it
a
be
vote
really-
on, would it be,
really untimely.
but in terms of,
We can have a
Robert's-
vote right now.
Yeah,
We're
should we
gonna
just do like we did the last
Yeah,
one?
we did
People,
last time.
people
Yeah.
comfortable enough to vote right now,
Yeah.
that'd be fine. Okay, so why don't we do that? So do we have a motion regarding Mr. Gustafson's?
That's close enough.
Um,
People have done a lot worse jobs with that.
Oh, I think that's the 3rd time I pronounced it, and the first 2 were worse. So okay, so yeah, I'm slowly. Do we have a motion regarding this enterprise in light of the ethics rules?
I would move that we find that there's no conflict between the proposed enterprise and the ethics code, and that we issue an opinion to that effect with the, again, advisory cautions to be mindful of future, any municipal contracting that is part of this enterprise in the future, and any potential confidential information that is related to the enterprise that becomes available in the course of employment, but that, again, as it comes to the code, we see no conflict.
Okay, we have a second on
I'll
that?
second that.
Any further discussion on
Unless you want to.
it? Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Okay, very good. So that motion passes. And so, yeah, so in about a month or so, you'll get an official, this actually is official, so you can begin relying on this
Okay.
now, but you'll actually get a written out document, and that is your safe harbor as far as the ethics codes go.
Wonderful.
All right, great. Well, thank you for your
Well,
time.
hopefully we
Sorry-
can cut you back up a little bit on your schedule.
Yeah, well, sorry for you been waiting so long. I really appreciate it. But,
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I appreciate all your time you're committing to this ethics board. I went through and read through all of your resumes last week, and it's really an impressive set of people sitting at this table, and it's great that they have that for matters such as this to, ensure that everything's above board and everything we do, and I appreciate it.
well, we look forward to your non-chlorinated water. So.
Very curious.
It did make us drink it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Requiring like the
Okay,
dog
next.
to come if we got some
I know.
non-fluoridated
Right,
water,
right,
like
nice,
bring the
right.
subject of your inquiry
I'm
to.
gonna bring him in.
We are over time. People are okay time-wise, so I can stay, but.
I can stay for a little bit longer since I was reading my email to make sure nothing's just on fire in my
Yeah,
office.
And
Well,
what
there's somebody else waiting out
Yeah,
there.
one person.
Yeah.
I'm
We've
gonna
got-
bring him in, but I'm gonna take control of it if the board does mind because of time constraints.
Do it.
Okay, you might want
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can stay though too, so.
Okay,
Why
yeah.
why don't we call that? That sounds like a reasonable thing. Let's stay till 2, and then we'll call it.
David,
Call him
I
in.
can't say his last name.
I don't think I'm gonna try.
Him or her, whoever it is.
Well, yeah, it's confidentiality.
Oh, yes, please shut the door.
So does that mean we should be going into executive
Mhm.
session, I
Yes,
believe?
yeah, if we're gonna close the door and be confidential, we'll be
So you have to do a
executive
motion to go
session.
into
Tell me move
executive
to close into
session?
executive session?
Someone
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good, let's, we're now